I'm 75 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen bee.
The room did not erupt when Catherine delivered her decision. It became completely still. Across the polished table, Queen Camilla stopped moving, her fingers frozen around the edge of a briefing folder, as the Princess of Wales calmly confirmed that the Queen would no longer hold an independent leadership role on future royal tours. There was no argument, no raised voice, and no room for misunderstanding. One sentence had quietly redrawn the monarchy's public future. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew everyone inside Buckingham Palace's diplomatic briefing room understood what had happened. The room served as the private space, where royals and advisors approved overseas duties, security plans, and meetings with foreign leaders. Printed itineraries covered the table beside threat assessments and Commonwealth correspondence, meaning messages from nations linked to the crown. William sat near Catherine, while the secretary and two planners avoided looking at Camilla. Catherine did not soften the decision. She confirmed that Camilla would no longer direct, lead, or undertake separate overseas tours. From that moment, the Queen's international appearances would be supporting engagements beside Charles, while the prince and his wife would take responsibility for major diplomatic journeys representing the monarchy abroad. The change mattered because royal tours shape how governments, charities, and people understand who carries the crown's voice. Camilla lowered her eyes to the revised schedule. 3 proposed solo visits had vanished beside her name. She held the folder so tightly that the paper bent beneath her fingers, yet she refused to show panic. Catherine felt the cruelty of that silence, but she kept her voice steady. She knew any apology could make the announcement sound uncertain, and uncertainty was something the palace could no longer afford. The Queen finally turned to Charles, expecting resistance. He removed his glasses, placed them beside the documents, and said the revised touring structure had his approval. That brief statement crushed the last hope that Catherine was merely testing an idea. This was settled policy, meaning an official decision the royal household was required to follow. Camilla then found the Caribbean anniversary tour she had expected to lead. Catherine's name had replaced hers, and beside it stood a handwritten sentence: "Continuity requires the next generation." She understood at once that illness, timing, and security had nothing to do with the removal. Camilla closed the folder without signing the acknowledgement page. She asked Catherine to remain behind. As William, Charles, and the advisors filed out, the door closed, leaving the future queen alone with the woman whose royal role she had just permanently narrowed. To the public, Catherine and Camilla stood on the same balconies, attended the same ceremonies, and served the same monarch. But inside the palace, their positions were moving in opposite directions. One woman had spent years fighting to be accepted at the center of royal life. The other was being prepared to inherit its future. Now the decision over royal tours had forced both women to confront a truth that careful smiles could no longer conceal. Camilla remained seated after the door closed, but the silence between them had changed. International tours had never been simple duties to her. They were proof that years of criticism had not defeated her, proof that foreign leaders would welcome her, and proof that the public could see her as a working queen, rather than a figure trapped by old controversy. Every banquet, speech, and diplomatic greeting had strengthened the place she had fought to secure. Now Catherine had reduced those appearances to supporting roles beside Charles, and the loss felt far more personal than any revised schedule suggested. Catherine understood that pain, yet her own position had also changed. Advisors no longer treated her as merely a popular royal presence. They expected her to protect the monarchy's long-term image, choose international engagements with care, and shape the diplomatic style that would define William's future reign. That responsibility carried power, but it also demanded decisions that could wound people she still had to face across family tables. Camilla finally spoke. Her voice remained calm, But disappointment sharpened every word as she asked whether years of loyalty could truly be erased by moving names across a timetable. She said that appearing only beside the king would make her ceremonial rather than useful. Catherine did not look away. She admitted the decision had been painful, but insisted it was not designed to humiliate her. Conflicting teams, competing announcements, and overlapping causes had weakened the crown's direction, and someone had to bring order before the damage became public. The Queen argued that experience had earned her the right to continue. Catherine answered that the monarchy could not build its future around what any individual believed they had earned. Service, she said, was not possession. It was responsibility, and responsibility sometimes changed hands before people were ready. Then came the revelation Camilla had not expected. Catherine confirmed that William had supported the restructuring after reviewing overseas polling, diplomatic feedback, and rising tour expenses. The future king had not remained neutral. He and his wife had reached the decision together. Through got tour expenses. Camilla rose without another word and walked toward Charles's private apartments. Catherine watched her leave, knowing the next question would be aimed at the king himself. Camilla may have lost the argument with Catherine, but she still believes Charles can restore what was taken until one forgotten incident reveals why he chose not to intervene. The decision did not begin inside the Buckingham Palace briefing room. It began months earlier, thousands of miles from London, during a royal reception that should have ended with applause. Instead, one unscripted exchange left diplomats confused, aides alarmed, and Catherine privately convinced that the monarchy could no longer operate with competing centers of authority. Long before Camilla's name disappeared from the international schedule, a single evening had turned quiet concern into an irreversible plan. Tension had already been building during joint overseas visits. Camilla's staff and the Wales household repeatedly issued different instructions about speeches, seating arrangements, charitable announcements, and press access. Diplomats received revised plans from one team, only to be given conflicting directions by the other. The public saw polished ceremonies, but palace officials experienced frustration, wasted preparation, and a growing fear that the crown was sending two messages at once. Catherine had resisted drastic action. She understood that international work gave the Queen a sense of purpose and acceptance that palace titles alone could never provide. She asked staff to improve coordination and urged William not to let the problem become a contest between the current queen and the future one. The prince listened, but he also watched each disagreement become harder to contain. Then came Valletta. At a Commonwealth cultural reception, Camilla stepped forward and announced that she would personally lead a new international program focused on youth education. The Commonwealth is a voluntary group of nations, many with historic links to the British Crown, making any royal initiative connected to it politically sensitive. Catherine had spent months preparing to unveil a closely related project the following morning. Her speech was complete. Diplomatic partners had been briefed. Press material had already been approved. Catherine approached Camilla after the reception and asked why the announcement had been made without consultation. Hurt sharpened her voice, but she remained controlled. The Queen refused to retreat. She replied that a monarch's wife should not need permission to speak about service, then dismissed the suggestion that she had undermined anyone. By midnight, officials were rewriting Catherine's address, canceling prepared material, and assuring local representatives that the programs were not competing. William watched his wife remove entire pages from her speech. In that moment, he understood the conflict was no longer personal. It had become institutional. Charles confronted Camilla the next morning, without aides present, and asked her to coordinate future announcements through the Central Tour Office, the palace team responsible for organizing overseas engagements. She answered that she would not become invisible simply to make succession planning easier. After returning to Britain, William ordered a confidential review of every international royal duty. Months later, The report reached Catherine with one sentence underlined twice. Overseas leadership must be unified before another conflict occurs. That underlined recommendation gave Catherine the authority to act. But when Camilla discovers who documented the Valletta incident, private resentment explodes into a confrontation no palace aide can soften. By the time Camilla entered Charles's sitting room, restraint had become anger. Catherine's decision had wounded her, but the revelation behind it felt worse. Members of the royal household had carefully recorded every error, disagreement, and diplomatic complication. What Camilla had regarded as ordinary friction had been assembled into evidence against her. When Catherine and William were summoned to join the conversation, 4 members of the royal family faced one another without secretaries, advisors, or escape. Charles ordered every aide to remain outside. He wanted no notes taken, no interruptions, and no official language hiding what had become a family confrontation. Clarence House, the King and Queen's London residence, had hosted countless private discussions, but this meeting carried a different weight. Camilla sat with the confidential review across her lap, while Catherine and William took their places opposite her. The monarch remained standing between them, caught between the woman beside him and the couple preparing to inherit the institution he now led. William spoke first. He confirmed that he had ordered the review, but insisted he had not written the evidence himself. Diplomatic staff, communications officers, tour directors, and foreign hosts had documented the repeated confusion. The prince had gathered their accounts because each conflict had placed royal credibility at risk. Catherine approved the final recommendation only after the pattern became impossible to dismiss. Camilla turned directly toward her. She said the restructuring no longer felt like modernization. It felt like removal, carefully planned and politely delivered. Then she asked whether Catherine had been waiting for one mistake in Valletta to seize control of overseas duties. Catherine leaned forward. Her answer carried no apology. The Valletta announcement had not created the problem, she said. It had ended her belief that the problem would solve itself. Protecting the crown sometimes meant disappointing members of the family permanently, especially when personal pride began damaging public duty. The Queen looked to Charles and asked him to restore one independent tour. One journey, she argued, would prove that she still held genuine authority. The king finally sat down, folded his hands, and refused. He would not overrule Catherine, because doing so would weaken the future structure he had already approved. Camilla removed the unsigned acknowledgement page and placed it on the table. William quietly pushed a pen toward her. She stared at it, then pushed it back. Accepting reality, she said, did not require pretending it was fair. Camilla rose and announced that she would reconsider every public duty linked to the new arrangement. Charles watched her leave, knowing that withdrawal could expose the conflict to the entire country. The confrontation has ended without compromise, and Camilla's refusal to sign now forces the palace to reveal exactly who possesses the power to enforce Catherine's decision. Catherine had delivered the announcement, but she had not acted alone. Behind her calm words stood a network of approvals, designed to survive emotional resistance. The king's consent, William's succession authority, diplomatic recommendations, security limitations, and a newly unified royal tour office. Camilla could refuse the pen, challenge the reasoning, and withdraw her cooperation, but she could not restore her former role by force of personality. The decision had been built to remain standing, even if the family fractured around it. The new structure placed every major overseas engagement under one central committee, chaired jointly by William and Catherine, with final approval resting with Charles. The committee was simply the small senior group responsible for deciding who traveled, where they went, and what message each visit carried. Individual royal households could no longer build separate programs that competed for attention or contradicted one another. For the first time, the monarchy's international work would move through a single chain of command. Catherine held operational control because her responsibility had expanded beyond appearances. She had been chosen to shape long-term public diplomacy, meaning the way the crown builds trust with other nations, through service, relationships, and carefully planned public work. Programs involving families, early childhood, health, culture, and Commonwealth youth would now fall under her direction. She could decide the themes, timing, and presentation of the most important tours, while William protected the wider strategy behind them. Charles remained behind after Camilla left the confrontation. He picked up the pen she had rejected and turned it slowly between his fingers. The king admitted to William that approving the plan had been easier than watching his wife understand its true cost. He had expected anger. He had not expected the silence, the wounded stare, or the feeling that years of loyalty had been reduced to one unsigned page. William felt the humiliation, but he refused to weaken the decision. Reversing even one tour, he warned, would make Catherine appear powerless and invite every royal household to challenge future reforms. The monarchy could not ask her to lead while denying her the right to make painful choices. The consequences arrived that afternoon. Camilla's private secretary opened the confidential planning calendar during a staff briefing and found the Queen's separate scheduling channel gone. Active files had been transferred to the central office without negotiation. One path remained. Camilla could serve as senior host during selected state visits in Britain and accompany Charles on major diplomatic journeys. She had not been erased, but she had lost independent command. Camilla refused to choose. Instead, she ordered her team to continue preparing a solo visit to Morocco. The first true test of Catherine's authority is no longer theoretical. An aircraft slot, a diplomatic invitation, and Camilla's reputation are now moving toward the same unavoidable collision. The consequences arrived not through a dramatic proclamation, but through a short administrative email. At 8:40 the next morning, Camilla's office received confirmation that the proposed Morocco tour had been removed from the royal schedule. Transport arrangements were suspended. Advance staff were recalled. The British ambassador was instructed that no independent visit would proceed. For the first time, Catherine's decision ceased to be words spoken across a table. It became a cancellation carrying Camilla's name. Camilla's team had spent weeks shaping the 3-day program around literacy, women's health, and cultural preservation. The dates had not yet been announced, but discussions with officials had progressed far enough for her staff to consider the visit almost certain. Draft speeches had been prepared, local organizations had been contacted, and diplomatic conversations were already moving forward. The tour mattered because it would have allowed the Queen to prove that her overseas work still carried independent purpose after Catherine's restructuring. Catherine acted only after receiving confirmation that planning had continued, despite the new chain of command. She signed the cancellation and instructed officials to explain that the visit could return later as part of a joint program with Charles. It could not, however, proceed under Camilla's leadership alone. The message was polite, but its meaning was severe. The future Queen's authority would not be tested, and then quietly ignored. Camilla's private secretary read the email aloud at Clarence's house. She listened without interruption, removed her reading glasses, and placed them beside a stack of briefing cards. No anger crossed her voice when she asked whether the ambassador had already been informed. The answer came softly. Yes. The Queen dismissed the room at once. Alone, she opened the folder containing the speech she had begun writing and crossed out its opening sentence with one heavy stroke. That small act revealed more than shouting ever could. The tour had represented survival, usefulness, and acceptance. Now it had become evidence that her independence could be removed before the public even knew it existed. Her staff began dividing almost immediately. Some urged Camilla to refuse every international engagement until her authority was restored. Others warned that such a withdrawal would make personal status appear more important than service. Loyalty turned into argument, and every proposed response carried a new danger. Then the crisis escaped the palace. A scheduling memo reached a political editor, who learned that a planned Queen's visit had been cancelled under the new system. Communications officials realized publication could come within hours. Before it did, Catherine sent a handwritten request asking Camilla to meet privately at Windsor, without Charles, William, or advisors. There was no apology in the note, only urgency. With the palace preparing for public exposure, the future of their relationship comes down to two women, one handwritten note, and a conversation no institution can conduct for them. There were no briefing papers at Windsor, no secretaries waiting to record the outcome, and no husbands positioned between them. Catherine chose a small private drawing room overlooking the grounds, because she wanted the next conversation to belong only to the two women involved. Camilla arrived expecting another defense of palace procedure. Instead, she found Catherine standing beside an untouched tea service, prepared to explain not merely why the decision had been made, but what she feared would happen without it. Catherine closed the door herself and asked Camilla to sit beside her rather than across a formal table. Their phones, folders, and prepared arguments remained outside. Windsor Castle was more than a royal residence. It was a working home of the monarchy, where private family choices often carried public consequences. Without Charles, William, or palace advisors between them, the conflict no longer felt like a battle over schedules. It became a reckoning between two women who had both learned how quickly royal duty could consume personal dignity. Catherine spoke first. Governments and Commonwealth representatives, she explained, had increasingly asked who carried the monarchy's future message. The Commonwealth is a voluntary association of nations, many with historic ties to the crown, and confusion within royal programs could easily become diplomatic uncertainty. Separate initiatives, overlapping announcements, and rival teams had made priorities harder to understand. The change was never meant to declare one woman more worthy than the other. It was designed to show continuity before another mistake made division impossible to hide. Then Catherine admitted what she had not said inside Buckingham Palace. She feared inheriting a fractured institution, where every reform became a personal wound, and every difficult decision created another private enemy. Delivering the order had made her feel cruel, but avoiding it would only leave William to face the same crisis later, when the future king carried even greater pressure. Camilla's anger weakened. She confessed that overseas tours had given her something titles never fully provided, proof that people could see her service instead of judging only her past. Losing independent visits felt like being told that acceptance had been temporary, offered while convenient, and withdrawn as succession moved closer. Catherine did not restore the old role. Instead, she offered a new one. Camilla could lead a permanent British-based program coordinating literacy and community reading across Commonwealth nations, while serving as senior host for visiting delegations. The work would hold real authority without creating competing tour leadership. The Queen accepted the reality, but requested one promise. She would not be presented as incapable or burdensome. Catherine agreed the announcement would emphasize continuity, experience, and shared service. Before they parted, Camilla promised to stand beside Catherine at the next diplomatic reception and support the unified program publicly. The conflict has shifted from private resistance to public proof, and one appearance beneath the palace chandeliers will determine whether the world sees defeat, unity, or something more complicated. By sunrise, the cancelled Morocco visit was no longer a palace secret. Broadcasters described a struggle over royal authority. Newspapers printed competing accounts of Catherine's rise, and commentators searched every previous appearance for signs of hostility. Yet the image that ultimately defined the day did not come from a leaked document. It came that evening, when Camilla entered Buckingham Palace beside Catherine, paused before the assembled cameras, and made one deliberate gesture that transformed the meaning of the entire crisis. The media storm grew with every hour. Some commentators called the restructuring the clearest transfer of practical power from Charles's reign to the next generation. Others argued that Catherine had acted with necessary discipline, while several voices questioned whether Camilla had been pushed aside too suddenly after years of public service. The debate mattered because royal tours were not simply ceremonial journeys. They helped define who represented Britain abroad, who carried the monarchy's message, and who appeared ready to shape its future. Buckingham Palace responded with a formal statement confirming that overseas programs would now be unified for consistency and long-term continuity. The announcement also made clear that the Queen would continue supporting Charles during major international visits and would lead an expanded Commonwealth literacy program from Britain. That program connected reading and community initiatives across member nations linked to the Crown. The wording protected her dignity, but everyone understood that independent tour leadership had passed to Catherine and William. Camilla prepared for the diplomatic reception while the arguments continued outside. She adjusted the clasp of her bracelet twice before Charles asked whether she was certain she wanted to attend. The king feared that every expression and movement would be judged. She answered that staying away would allow strangers to decide what her silence meant. She would not surrender the story of her own acceptance. Catherine waited near the entrance with a different burden. The structural battle had been won, but she did not want victory to look like humiliation. Any visible distance between them would confirm the worst headlines. She steadied herself as the doors opened, knowing that the next few seconds could either calm the monarchy or deepen the fracture. Camilla stepped beside her, placed one hand lightly behind Catherine's shoulder, and invited her to move forward first toward the visiting delegation. The following morning, the Chronicle placed that moment across its front page, beneath the headline, "The Future Steps Forward." When asked about the new arrangement, the Queen gave a recorded statement. "The Crown is strongest when experience makes room for continuity." Broadcasters repeated the words throughout the night because they acknowledged Catherine's authority without reducing Camilla to defeat. Afterward, she returned to Clarence House, removed the unsigned acknowledgement page, and placed it beside a fountain pen. The cameras have captured reconciliation, but the monarchy's final verdict will be written away from public view, in the signature Camilla once believed she could never give. Late that night, Queen Camilla sat alone with the document that had frozen her into silence only days earlier. Nothing in its wording had changed. She would not recover independent command of overseas tours, and Catherine would not retreat from the authority she had accepted. Yet Camilla herself had changed. The page no longer represented only a role being taken away. It represented a choice between clinging to an old structure and helping the monarchy survive the transition already unfolding. Camilla read the acknowledgement again. The document, a formal confirmation that she accepted the new arrangement, stated that her future overseas appearances would take place beside Charles or through programs approved by the Unified Royal Tour Office. That central team would control international schedules. Catherine and William would lead the principal diplomatic tours, while the Queen would no longer direct a separate international program. Her role had not disappeared. Camilla would oversee a Commonwealth-wide literacy network from Britain and serve as senior host during state visits, occasions when foreign leaders are welcomed by the Crown. She would retain purpose and visibility, but she could no longer command a rival center of authority. Camilla uncapped the fountain pen and paused above the signature line. The cancelled Morocco visit returned to her mind, along with Charles's refusal to intervene and Catherine's steady voice. Every wound remained, but bitterness no longer controlled her choice. She lowered the pen and signed, without changing a word. Charles entered moments later and saw the completed page. The king offered no congratulations and repeated no defense. He simply placed his hand over hers, understanding that the signature had cost his wife more than the palace would admit. Camilla looked at him, and he remained beside her in silence. Catherine received the document at Windsor the following morning. She read Camilla's name, closed the folder, and felt relief rather than triumph. William recognized the moment as the first transfer of authority before the end of Charles's reign. The future had been allowed to lead before it inherited. Camilla had not been erased, and Catherine had not destroyed her place. One woman surrendered authority tied to her identity. The other accepted power without cruelty. Together, they turned rivalry into transition, and proved the crown could honor past service while making room for its future. And with Camilla's signature secured, and Catherine's authority recognized, the conflict reached its final conclusion. The queen kept her dignity, the future queen accepted command, and the monarchy moved forward as one institution rather than two competing courts. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.